If you want to get good at endurance routes, the first thing you've got to do is build a good base to work from. A good exercise for that is simply staying on the wall for 20 to 30 minutes with a light level of pump. So you'll be maybe a little bit out of breath, you'll feel a lot of extra blood flow in your forearms, you'll be slightly pumped, but you'll still be in control. If you have to stop because someone else is in the way, it's not a big problem for you to stop and just shake out. So simply start a stopwatch, get on the wall and keep going until you get really bored or your iPod runs out. If you want to mix it up a little bit, you can also try doing things like 10 minutes on the wall and 10 minutes off to allow you to do some slightly harder climbing when you're on the wall. And you can count up the amount of time that you're spending on the wall each week and try and build that up to build up a bigger and bigger base of endurance work. And that prepares you really well, both for long on-sites in particular, for long trad on-sites as well. That sort of fitness is really important. But also it builds a base to work the higher end power endurance for. So even if you're interested in some of the shorter routes, it's still worth having a good base of endurance from that type of training to work from. So normally a couple of months before I go on a trip or before I want to be fit for my route, I'll start training the higher end endurance and power endurance. And there's two main ways that I train that. So if I'm training for a pumpy route where I'm going to fall off with my arms screaming and I can barely undo my knot when I come down, I'll typically pick a circuit that's maybe 30 moves long. I'll go around that once, generally trying not to stop, either make a circuit that doesn't have any obvious rest points, or if there is a rest point, just chalk each hand once and force yourself to move on. So climb quite continuously. Ideally the circuit won't have too many cruxes and too many easy sections, it'll be quite a continuous level of difficulty. I'll usually time roughly how long that takes me, so let's say it takes about 1.5 minutes to climb a circuit that you know indoors of 30 moves, and then I'll rest for the same amount of time as it took me to climb. So I'll rest 1 minute 30, and then I'll climb it again, and I'll rest 1 minute 30 again. And quite a good exercise is simply to try and complete a certain number of reps of that. If you pick the difficulty of the circuit so that you can get round maybe 6 or 7 repetitions and then you're failing on your 7th and your 8th repetition, that's usually a good level for that sort of training. If you're more interested in training for the short, hard routes, where you'll get really powered down, fall off a move, but then you'll actually not be that pumped 30 seconds later, then you've got a couple of other options. So one is to pick a circuit that's right at your limit. Again, a continuous circuit without too many cruxes and too many easier sections is the best way to train this, and simply try to red point it. Climb as far as you can. If you fall off, quickly chalk up, have a little rest, get back on and keep climbing. When I'm doing this sort of training, I tend to have long rests in between the circuits. So if I need to rest 20-30 minutes in between circuits, that's okay. It's all about the quality rather than the quantity on that sort of training. Another way that you can train the short and hard power endurance is by picking 4 boulder problems that are quite hard for you and doing them back to back with just a short rest. So do the problem, drop off, chalk up. You want to rest for a length of time that's comparable to what you're on the wall for, or even shorter than that. So literally just dropping off, chalking up and pulling back on is usually enough. If you do 4 boulder problems like that, that is the equivalent of doing your circuit. So then again, take a long rest, 10, 15 minutes, even more if you need to. Pull back on, and try and do the same again. If you try to do 4 to 6 repetitions of that, that's usually a pretty good workout. And usually after doing that sort of shorter, more intense power endurance, you'll still have something left for either doing some of the longer power endurance after a long rest, or for doing some of the base endurance at the end of the session, almost as a warm down, doing 20 minutes on some easier terrain. I do almost all my endurance training on a bouldering wall or a circuit wall. It's a lot easier to be regular with a stopwatch. You can do your circuit, time yourself for a minute if a minute is your rest time that you're using, and get straight back on. You've not got to worry about whether your partner wants to climb, and usually it's going to take too long and so forth. It's a lot more time efficient if you're short on time. If you've got all day, then it's great to have a rope on and do it that way, but if you're struggling for time at all, or you want to be really structured and time your rests and do everything perfectly, then a bouldering wall is usually much easier to use. So Era Vella is quite a mixture of styles of endurance. On the bottom section you need that sort of short, hard power endurance. So to train for that I made a lot of replica circuits. I would do a replica circuit maybe around 8B, and then I'd have a short rest, and then I'd go into a long boulder problem, which is what the crux was. And I'd just gradually reduce the rest between the circuit and the boulder problem until I could climb one straight into the other. Then for the top section, which is easier moves, but you're pretty pumped because you've climbed a lot to get there, I was doing more of the style where I would do a circuit for say 1.5 minutes, rest for 1.5 minutes. Or often you can do foot on campusing exercises that work really well for that style of endurance as well. So spend 1 minute foot on campusing, doing a particular sequence, rest for 1 minute, and repeat that again for, again, between 6 and 8 reps. If you're failing on the last couple of reps is a good level. And with that, you can just gradually reduce the rest time. So if 1 week you do 1 minute on and then 1 minute resting, the next week you can do 1 minute on and then 50 seconds resting. And the next week, 1 minute on and 45 seconds resting, and just try and keep reducing that rest more and more, and suddenly you'll find that 6 weeks down the line, you can actually do those exercises with much, much less rest than you were doing at the start of the session, or the phase. That up. Been to Malham quite a lot recently. I'm pretty keen for Malham and Kilnsey this summer. There's quite a lot of good endurance routes at Malham actually. Did Bat Route the other week, which is a really, really good sort of endurance orientated 8C. And then yesterday fell off the top of Cry Freedom. Should have done some more fitness training. Yeah, it's got a bit of a spicy move up high on that one. I think this summer I'm definitely keen for some of the Yorkshire limestone in the UK, and then hopefully get my PhD finished and back out to Europe and maybe to Australia next year. Not this year. I'm done with projecting for this year. Spent too many goes falling off Era Vella, so I'll stick to trying things I can do in a few days, hopefully.